Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Lost Vale Chronicles. Now I know a lot of you listen to these stories late at night, maybe driving, maybe just watching the snow fall outside your window. But before you settle in, let me ask you something. Have you ever taken a train ride so quiet, so endless, that it felt like time itself had stopped? Tonight, we're traveling back to 1907, to the mountains of Montana, where a train carrying 83 passengers vanished during a blizzard. Weeks later, it was found perfectly preserved in ice, every clock frozen at the same moment in time. But here's the part history never explained. Eyewitnesses claimed that same train was seen arriving at a station 60 miles away at the exact same hour. Before we begin, take a moment to comment below where you're listening from. I love seeing how far this little community of mystery lovers reaches. And if you enjoy exploring forgotten corners of American history, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next story. Now, dim the lights, picture the snow drifting across an empty track, and let's begin. In the first week of January 1907, the Northern Continental Line began its proudest journey through the Rockies, a railway that engineers called the Silver Spine of the West. It stretched from Helena, Montana, through snow-choked valleys and timber passes, before curling south toward a growing mining town called St. Agnes. The newspapers celebrated it as a symbol of progress, a line that would bind the mountains to the modern age. The railway promised warmth, safety, and connection. Electric heat ran beneath the passenger cars, brass fittings gleamed, and telegraph wires followed the track mile for mile, ensuring that every message, every whistle could be traced. No one questioned that confidence. The passengers who boarded train number 117 on January 29th were the kind who believed in the future. There were miners heading home after payday, merchants with trunks of goods, a traveling preacher, and a small brass band hired to play at the grand opening of the St. Agnes Hotel. Even the conductor, Samuel Brodie, had dressed for the occasion, his uniform freshly pressed, his gold watch ticking proudly from his vest pocket. Outside, the weather was cold but calm. The sky over Helena was pale blue, the air brittle with frost. The morning paper predicted only light snowfall at higher elevations. It would be, everyone assumed, an easy run through the pass, 5 hours of mountain scenery, and then a warm supper waiting in St. Agnes. At precisely 5:15 p.m., the whistle blew, and number 117 pulled away from the depot, its polished engine gleaming like a bullet of brass and steam. Children waved from the platform as the train curved east toward the foothills. For the first 50 miles, the journey went exactly as planned. The electric heaters glowed, the dining car smelled of coffee and roast chicken, and telegraph operators along the route sent routine updates. Clear through. Gauge mile post 23. All systems nominal. Visibility excellent. At 8 o'clock p.m., the train reached the mouth of Black Pine Pass, the highest point of the route, where the tracks hugged the cliffside and wind could rise like a living thing. There, the telegraph wires began to hum faintly, static flickering through the line. The operator at Bozeman Junction reported that signals were growing fuzzy. By 9:30, his last message came through. Wind increasing, snow flurries, visibility low. It was followed by one more line, typed unevenly, as though by a shaking hand. Something wrong with the light. No further communication ever came. At the exact moment the telegraph fell silent, the night watchman at St. Agnes Station looked at his pocket watch. It read 9:47 p.m. He poured himself coffee and waited to hear the distant whistle echo through the valley, the signal that train 117 was beginning its descent. But the valley remained silent. No whistle. No light. And though the telegraph key continued to tap faintly through the static, the sound that came through wasn't Morse code. It was a low, rhythmic pulse, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. The operator at St. Agnes recorded it in the logbook before the line went dead entirely.
Unidentified transmission. Repeating pattern. Origin unknown. By morning, every connection between Helena and St. Agnes had gone dark. Train number 117 had entered the pass and never come out. The last clear sighting of train number 117 came from a telegraph operator stationed near Black Pine Ridge, a lonely outpost halfway between Helena and St. Agnes. At 9:32 p.m., he reported seeing the train's headlamp burning steady through light snowfall. By 9:40, he stepped outside again to check his line and saw nothing but white. He described the storm as falling upward. Snow wasn't drifting down from the clouds. It was rising from the valley floor, whipped into spirals that swallowed the telegraph poles one by one. The wind carried a sound like metal bending under strain. Then, all at once, the light on the horizon winked out. That same hour, in the mining town of Eldridge, a rancher named May Holland stepped onto her porch after hearing what she thought was thunder. She later told investigators it wasn't thunder at all. It was a long, groaning scream, like iron tearing through the sky. Her horses broke from their corral, eyes rolling white, and refused to approach the tracks for days afterward. At 9:47 p.m., the dispatcher in Helena heard the last signal come through. It was faint, just 5 dots, 3 dashes, and 2 more dots. Morse code for LIGHT. Then static consumed the line. Inside the train, passengers would have seen the first signs of something unnatural long before that. Survivors' accounts don't exist, of course, but fragments of recovered journals and the frozen scene discovered later tell enough of the story. A conductor's pocketbook found in the wreck recorded this final note: wind against both sides, windows frosting from inside, boiler pressure stable. God help us, it's too bright. Witnesses miles away claimed they saw a glow blooming behind the storm, pale orange, pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't lightning. It was steady, deliberate, and moving along the rails. For nearly 20 minutes, that light danced across the ridges before vanishing completely. By midnight, the blizzard had consumed the entire valley. Telegraph poles cracked like matchsticks. Lines went slack and vanished beneath the snow. Search crews couldn't even attempt to enter the pass. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees in less than an hour, and the wind drove sand-fine ice into anything left exposed. The following morning, the skies cleared as suddenly as they'd darkened. The storm simply stopped. The air was motionless, the sun sharp against a landscape smoothed flat and white. From the ridge, the pass looked untouched. No sign of derailment, no smoke, not even a shadow where the train should have been. The track foreman who first surveyed the scene described it best in his report to the railway board. It was as if the train had passed clean through the mountain, leaving no hole behind. When word reached St. Agnes, families gathered at the station, watching the horizon until dusk. Some swore they heard the whistle echo once around sundown, a single distant note carried on perfectly still air. The dispatcher noted the time in his log, 10 to 12 p.m. The same hour every clock aboard train 117 would later be found frozen. For 2 full weeks, the pass lay silent. Telegraph lines remained dead, and every crew sent to clear the track was turned back by collapsing snowbanks and impossible cold. Newspapers in Helena ran daily updates under the headline, "Train 117 Still Missing." Families gathered at the depot, refusing to leave until word came. It was mid-February when the first rescue team finally breached Black Pine Pass. 20 men with shovels, saws, and steam drills worked through 30 feet of snow and ice. They expected a derailment, wreckage scattered across the gorge, maybe a boiler explosion. What they found instead stopped them cold. The lead scout, Frank McCready, was the first to spot it. A glint of brass beneath the snow, not twisted metal, but perfect curvature. He brushed away a few inches and saw the engine's number plate, 117, shining through the frost. The locomotive stood upright on the rails, exactly where it should have been. Not wrecked, not buried, just encased.
The entire train was sealed in a sheath of translucent ice that stretched from rail to roofline. You could see everything through it, the dining car lamps, the seats, even the passengers. Some sat mid-conversation, others leaning toward windows, eyes open and bright, as if caught in the middle of a breath. Macready touched the surface and yanked his glove back. It wasn't cold. It was warm, humming faintly like a machine. They tried breaking through with picks, but each strike echoed across the valley like a bell and left no mark. When they applied heat, the ice hissed but didn't melt. It simply turned clear, revealing more of what was trapped inside. A woman in a travelling hat, smiling faintly, her teacup hovering inches from her lips. A boy clutching a brass toy trumpet. The conductor frozen mid-step, hand raised toward the emergency cord. Every clock inside the carriages pointed to 10:12 p.m. when word reached her. St. Helena, the Northern Continental, dispatched engineers and journalists to document the discovery. One reporter, Elias Burke of the Montana Ledger, described the sight as a timepiece wound and then forgotten by God. They brought portable generators to test the telegraph line. When they reconnected the wire to the locomotive's panel, the key began to tap on its own. Dot, dash, dot, dash, steady, mechanical, without pause. Burke copied it down and later realized it spelled a single word repeated endlessly: arrived. That night, several rescuers refused to stay in camp. They claimed to hear muffled noises from within the frozen cars, whispers, a faint clinking of glass, even the squeal of brakes easing off. One man swore he saw movement, the passengers shifting slightly when the moonlight passed over the windows. By dawn, 4 of the workers were missing. Their footprints ended at the side of the train, disappearing into the snow. The company halted the recovery operation, citing unstable conditions. Before they left, Macready turned back for one last look. The morning sun had struck the ice just right, making it shimmer like stained glass. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw the faces inside smiling. When the Northern Continental suspended the rescue mission, it wasn't the railway board that kept the story alive. It was a photographer. Harold Keene, age 32, had been freelancing for the Helena Herald when he convinced the editor to fund a final expedition into Black Pine Pass. The official company line was that ice instability made further investigation too dangerous. Keene didn't believe that. He'd grown up near the mountains, and he knew when people were hiding behind convenient words. So, on February the 21st, 1907, he packed his camera, a bulky Graflex 4x5, 6 glass plates, and enough magnesium flash powder to light a canyon, and followed the abandoned rail toward the site alone. For 30 miles, the world was nothing but white and silence. Then, just before dawn, the tracks curved around a ridge, and there it was. The frozen train, gleaming faintly in moonlight like a glass cathedral. Keene later described it in his journal. Not snow, not ice, but something between crystal and steel. The air around it hummed, like when you stand near a telegraph tower. My breath fogged once and then stopped. He set up his tripod 20 yards from the locomotive and prepared his first exposure. The flash ignited with a crack that echoed through the pass. For a heartbeat, the valley lit up brighter than day. And in that instant, the train glowed back. He swore he saw movement behind the glass. Dozens of faces turned toward him, eyes reflecting the flash like mirrors. Then darkness crashed down again. He took 5 plates in total, each from a different angle, and packed them carefully into his case. As he prepared to leave, the telegraph wire above the tracks began to twitch. Though the line had been severed for weeks, the sound that came through wasn't wind. It was rhythmic, deliberate, a faint tapping. Dot, dash, dot, dash. Arrived, arrived. Keene didn't run until he saw the faintest vapor trail rise from the train's stack.
warm steam curling against the cold. He made it back to Helena the following night, frostbitten and delirious, but alive. When he developed the glass plates in the Herald's darkroom, 3 of them turned out clear, the train frozen in perfect stillness, passengers visible in eerie detail. But the 4th plate, taken from the right side of the engine, showed something impossible. The train was gone. Only the empty track remained, a smooth indentation in the snow where the ice had stood. The final 2 plates were completely black. He brought the photographs to his editor, who refused to publish them, fearing a hoax would destroy the paper's credibility. But Keene made copies and sent one to the U.S. Geological Survey, hoping for scientific explanation. Within 2 weeks, government agents arrived in Helena, seized his negatives, and instructed the paper to stop covering the incident. Keene vanished that spring. His boarding room was found empty, his journal torn apart except for a single page left on the desk. They're moving again, 117's whistle in the night. Same sound, same hour. If I follow it this time, I won't come back. For months after the disappearance of Train 117, the town of St. Agnes lived in half-light. The telegraph line was never repaired. The Northern Continental dismantled its outpost, boarded the depot windows, and declared the line closed indefinitely. But the people who had waited at that station the night of January 29th never truly left. They came every evening at dusk, families bundled in furs, children clutching lanterns, gathering along the platform as if some part of them refused to accept what the government had signed off as an accident of nature. Old Martha Finch, who'd lost her husband and son on the train, lit the same kerosene lamp every night and hung it from the signal post. The flame never seemed to flicker, even when the wind screamed down from the mountains. "He'll see it," she told anyone who asked. "He always said he could find my light." By spring, a legend had already taken root. Ranchers riding through the upper valleys swore they saw a faint orange glow moving along the abandoned track at night, steady as a headlamp. Others said they'd heard the distant cry of a whistle at exactly 10:12 p.m., the moment the clocks on the train had frozen. In April 1907, a schoolteacher named Ellen Rourke began keeping a diary of the sightings. Every entry was timed and dated, every witness listed by name. She recorded 23 instances of the phantom light over 3 months. The most detailed note read, April 27th, a full moon. The light crossed the ridge just before midnight. No wind. Could see silhouettes in the windows, unmoving. A shimmer along the telegraph wires, as if current still lived in them. Locals started calling it the night line. Rail officials dismissed the reports as atmospheric refraction, a mirage caused by trapped cold air. But as summer came, even skeptics began to waver. Farmers found the snow at Black Pine Pass melting in fecht circles, as though heat radiated from beneath. And twice, crews discovered fresh rail imprints leading out of the sealed gorge, gleaming metal with no rust, like new-laid track. In August, Sheriff Calder, one of the men who had first searched the site, returned to investigate on his own. He never filed an official report, but his daughter later claimed he came home grey-faced and trembling. He burned his boots that same night and refused to go near the station again. When asked what he'd seen, he said only, "It's still running. God help anyone who flags it down." By the time winter returned, most of the families who had waited finally gave up hope. The depot was torn down for lumber, and the Northern Continental rerouted its service far to the south. But for decades afterward, travellers through the Rockies spoke of a light that glided silently along the old right-of-way, vanishing the moment you looked straight at it. And on some January nights, if you stood on the frozen platform at St. Agnes and pressed your ear to the wind, you could still hear it, the faint clang of a dinner bell, the hiss of steam, and the low, mournful whistle of Train 117, forever arriving, but never stopping. By late March 1908, the Northern Continental finally authorized a recovery operation. The winter storms had receded, and the frozen pass, where train 117 had vanished more than a year before, was once again accessible. The goal was simple: remove the train, transport it to a rail depot in Helena, and hand it over to federal scientists for analysis. But the men sent into Black Pine Pass soon realized there was nothing simple about what they found. The ice around the train hadn't cracked or thawed during the spring melt. It remained smooth, flawless, and faintly luminescent beneath the sun. When they placed their hands against it, they reported a low vibration beneath the surface, like a faraway engine still running somewhere underground. At first, they tried ordinary methods: axes, chisels, and controlled heat. The moment the torches touched the ice, the vibration changed. A humming started, low and even, rising through the ground like a plucked string. The torches flickered. Compass needles spun in circles. Then the ice began to dissolve. It didn't melt. It vanished, turning into a vapor that shimmered orange and white before fading into thin air. The mist carried a faint metallic taste, and one man claimed he could hear voices within it, whispering over one another like distant radio static. When the first carriage cleared, the rescuers froze where they stood. The passengers weren't as they'd been described in 1907. Their faces had changed. Some looked decades older, skin drawn tight, hair silvered, but others seemed wrong, distorted. One woman's eyes were open, the irises jet black as ink. Another figure appeared inhumanly tall, his spine arched against the roof, hands splayed on the glass, as if trying to push outward. The lead engineer stumbled backward, whispering that these weren't the same 83 passengers who'd boarded in Helena. As they continued working, the hum deepened, now pulsing rhythmically through the track itself. Tools vibrated off the ground. The men shouted to stop the heat, but the ice had already consumed itself, releasing more of that luminous vapor until the air grew thick with it. When the last of it cleared, the train's steel hull began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, until it was difficult to look at directly. The telegraph poles, long snapped and dead, suddenly sparked with blue light, sending random pulses down the line. One operator in St. Agnes reported receiving a single word across his dead transmitter: arrived. Moments later, the lights in town flickered and the hum ceased. The recovery crew sealed the remaining cars with heavy iron sheets and placed them on 6 flat cars under armed guard. No records list where they were taken. The official report labeled the cargo only as railway material for geological survey. Within a week, the site was emptied. No rails, no telegraph, no evidence that a train had ever passed through. But on the first night after the removal, the residents of St. Agnes awoke to a strange glow behind the mountain ridge. Soft, amber, and rhythmic, like the reflection of a moving headlamp behind glass. It pulsed 7 times. Then the valley went silent, and every clock in town stopped at 10:12 p.m. When the federal report on the St. Agnes incident was sealed, the Northern Continental quietly hired its own investigator. The company's reputation, and millions in insurance, hung on an explanation, any explanation. They turned to Charles Leving, a former Pinkerton agent known for his discretion. Leving had worked on industrial sabotage cases in Chicago, railway heists in Denver, even a series of electrical anomalies for the U.S. Signal Corps. His instructions were simple: find out what really happened in Black Pine Pass, and do it without drawing attention. He arrived in Helena under an assumed name in August 1908, posing as a railway inspector. What he found disturbed even a man hardened by years of criminal investigation. The valley was gone. The entire trackbed had been stripped clean: rails, ties, telegraph poles, leaving a scar of smooth black earth that gave off heat even at night. He took temperature readings, 83 degrees Fahrenheit, steady, constant, despite the mountain cold.
When he held a compass near the soil, the needle spun wildly. In his notebook he wrote, "The ground itself is magnetized. No natural field could account for this. Either deliberate interference or residue from something we don't yet understand." Leving spoke with locals who remembered the frozen train. One rancher swore the sound of the whistle still echoed from the canyon. But twice. When pressed, he explained, "It comes once from the east, once from the west. 2 trains, same note, chasing each other in the dark." That detail haunted Leving. He camped near the old pass for 3 nights, keeping a telegraph recorder connected to an improvised antenna. On the second night, at exactly 10:12 p.m., the wire clicked twice in rapid sequence. 2 distinct bursts of code, one faint, one strong. Both repeated the same 3 words, "Line still active." He verified the signal's origin twice. Both appeared to come from opposite directions along a track that no longer existed. Back in Helena, Leving searched for company documentation on the recovery convoy. There were no manifests, no requisition forms, no destination listed for the sealed cars. But inside the station master's archive, he discovered something stranger. A duplicate passenger manifest. The original list from 1907 named 83 passengers. The second, dated 6 weeks later, listed the same names, each with a new column marked "Confirmed Arrival." Every name had a check mark beside it. He brought the document to a company executive who refused to discuss it, muttering only, "Some trains aren't ours to stop." Leving continued his private investigation for nearly 2 years, recording temperature fluctuations, compasses spinning at night, and the faint glow reappearing above the ridge every January. His final entry, dated February 1910, reads, "Heard 2 whistles tonight. One faint, one near. Difference of 32 seconds. If you stand on the ridge at midnight, you'll hear it arrive twice. One coming, one returning. Unsure which belongs to us." That was the last page. When his estate was inventoried after his death in 1915, the files labelled SA-117 were missing. Only his notebook remained, its final line underlined twice in heavy ink. Whichever one is real, it's still on time. By 1911, the story of Train 117 had already become folklore. The railroad denied everything, of course. Newspapers printed cautious retractions, and company men insisted that Black Pine Pass never existed. But among miners and trappers in the Rockies, the legend of the ghost train had taken root. That winter, a group of 6 miners heading north from Bannock Creek decided to camp along the old right-of-way, the same curve where the telegraph wires once followed the track through the gorge. The pass was abandoned, buried in snow, yet the rails beneath their tents still shimmered faintly when moonlight hit them. They joked about it around the fire. "Maybe the ghost will give us a lift to Helena," one said. Then, just after 10 p.m., the wind shifted. It wasn't a gust. It was a pressure, a sudden heaviness in the air, like a storm rolling in without sound. The snow around them began to glow faint orange, and the men looked toward the ridge. 2 points of light cut through the flurry, small at first, then larger, steady, and impossibly level. Headlights. Someone shouted that it had to be a train coming from the old line. The men scattered to the sides of the clearing, waving lanterns, expecting a runaway locomotive. But there was no sound of wheels, no vibration underfoot. The lights passed between the trees, silent and straight, followed by the faint hiss of steam that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The air grew hot, dry, the kind of heat that makes snow shrink instead of melt. The lead miner, James Weller, later described what happened next in a sworn statement to the sheriff of Bannock. "It came through like a shadow on fire. Cars, windows, people sitting inside, all clear as day but lit from within. No noise but the wind. We saw faces looking out at us. They didn't blink. They didn't move. When the glow reached their camp, the entire world went silent. Not quiet, mute. The fire didn't crackle. Their own breathing stopped making sound. For a moment, every man stood inside a world of pure white light. Then it was gone. No sound, no wind, no fading echo. Just emptiness. Their tents were still standing, untouched. The snow where the train had passed was glassy smooth, and every man's pocket watch had frozen at 10:12 p.m. The miners packed up the next morning without a word. When they reached Bannock, they took their camera film to be developed. Every frame was exposed perfectly, sharp, balanced, professionally lit. But each image was blank. No faces, no light, no trees. Just white. A week later, Weller returned alone to retrieve the rest of their gear. He found the campsite buried under a thin sheet of ice, smooth as mirror glass. In its reflection, he swore he saw the train again. Upside down, distant, traveling silently through the sky. When he blinked, it was gone. The sheriff filed his statement, stamped it unsubstantiated, and locked it away. But among the mining towns of Montana, one saying took hold and never left. If you hear the whistle but no rails beneath your feet, don't look up. Just let it pass. Nearly half a century passed before anyone spoke of Train 117 again in any official capacity. By the 1950s, the Northern Continental had long dissolved into smaller companies, its documents scattered across archives and forgotten basements. But one woman, Dr. Margaret Elkins, a historian at the University of Montana, found herself obsessed with what the company's ledgers called the St. Agnes anomaly. Elkins was cataloguing early railway photographs for a museum exhibit when she noticed something odd. Two identical negatives, taken 15 years apart, showed the same stretch of track outside Bannock Station. At first glance, both appeared ordinary: snow, telegraph poles, mountains in the distance. But when she magnified the images, she realized they weren't the same photo at all. In the second print, a faint outline of a train ran through the frame. Transparent, glowing faint blue. Even stranger, the passengers' faces were visible through the windows. They matched the list from the 1907 manifest, names Elkins had memorized from her research. Every single one. She assumed it was a double exposure, some trick of the developing process. But when she compared the negatives, she found they'd been taken on different film stocks, with different cameras years apart. The position of the sun, the telegraph poles, even the angle of snowdrifts matched perfectly, as though time itself had copied the scene. She took her findings to the State Archives in Helena, where she was granted access to sealed railway files. Inside a plain brown envelope marked Confidential 117 Incident, she discovered a carbon copy of an internal memo from 1908. Recovered subjects exhibit sustained biological stasis, motion detectable in short exposure, observation suspended indefinitely. The memo was unsigned. Elkins requested permission to publish her findings, but 2 days later her access was revoked. A representative from a federal preservation agency visited the university, collected her photographs, and left no contact information. Unwilling to let it rest, she made her own copies in secret. When she examined them under ultraviolet light, she saw something the human eye couldn't. Tiny rows of Morse code etched along the film grain itself. Each dash and dot formed one repeating message. Arrived. Her final report, never officially published, was later discovered among her personal papers after her death in 1974. It included a note written in pencil in the margin: "Not double exposure, not light leak. Identical train, identical passengers, separated by distance and by reason." The university quietly sealed her archives after that. But years later, a student assistant sorting through mislabeled boxes swore she found an unlabeled reel of microfilm in Dr. Elkins's handwriting. When projected, it showed only static and faint lines, until 10:12 flashed briefly at the bottom corner, followed by a single frame of something unmistakable. A locomotive, glowing blue, windows alight,
sliding across a mountain ridge under falling snow. Then the reel snapped in two. More than a century has passed since train 117 vanished into the mountains, and most people now dismiss it as folklore, a ghost story told around campfires by hunters and truckers crossing the Montana range. The rails are long gone, the route consumed by forest and snow. Only the old granite mile markers remain, half buried in moss, pointing toward a destination that no longer exists. But even now, the locals will tell you that some nights the air feels different, still expectant, especially in the last week of January. Hikers who stray near the old Black Pine corridor report strange magnetic interference. Compasses twitch, phones lose power, and always the same sound, a long, distant whistle echoing through the valley. One note, low and mournful, carrying farther than any living train could travel. In 1978, a survey team from the Forest Service recorded something they couldn't explain. At precisely 10:12 p.m., their seismograph, meant to measure ground stability for reforestation, registered a vibration equal to the passage of a 200-ton locomotive. There were no tracks for 50 miles in any direction. One of the technicians, Alan Dorsey, claimed he'd seen orange light flickering through the trees, like reflections from polished metal. His written report ended with a line later redacted in the public copy. I heard it slow down. I swear I heard brakes. Every decade since, sightings repeat. Truckers on US Route 12, cutting through the range on winter nights, describe headlights moving parallel to the road, keeping perfect pace for miles before drifting off into the snow. Campers hear rhythmic clanking beneath the frozen ground, as if buried wheels still turned far below. And always, that time, 10:12 p.m. In 1993, a Montana State University research team attempted to triangulate the source of the sound using modern sensors. They recorded an ultra-low frequency, NC hum detectable only through specialized equipment, exactly 17 Hz, the frequency associated with heavy mechanical resonance. When they overlaid the signal on a topographical map, it traced a perfect arc following the original St. Agnes line. Halfway through the night, the sensors failed. The final data point transmitted one word before the feed cut. Arrived. Today, the official site of the old pass is closed, marked by rusted warning signs and chain-link fencing. But every January 29th, people still come. Paranormal investigators, historians, even descendants of the lost passengers. They bring cameras, recorders, and lanterns, setting them along what was once the main track. Most leave disappointed. Some leave terrified. Those who stay past midnight speak of a wind that isn't cold but warm, like breath against the skin. Snow stops falling. The forest goes silent. Then, from somewhere deep in the valley, comes the soft hiss of steam. A glow rises through the trees, orange and steady, gliding slowly along the invisible line. Silhouettes move behind frosted windows, faces half seen through drifting snow. And for a moment, the whistle sounds again. Clear, mournful, familiar. Then it fades into the dark, leaving only stillness and the faint scent of smoke and iron. No one knows where train 117 is bound. Some say it circles time itself. Others believe it never stopped, never derailed, only slipped into another track, another century, still keeping schedule. But if you ever find yourself in the Rockies on a winter night and you hear that whistle cut the wind, don't look for lights. Don't step toward the sound. Because for those who see it clearly, the train always stops. And it never leaves empty. And that brings us to the end of tonight's mystery, the frozen train of St. Agnes. Was this a natural disaster frozen in time, or a moment when two versions of history crossed paths? Let me know your theory in the comments. I always love reading what you think after each story.
If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. We've got more true American mysteries coming soon, from forgotten mines to hospitals erased from maps. Until next time, keep your radios warm, your lanterns lit. And if you ever hear a train whistle after midnight, don't go looking for the tracks.